Alain is definitely a film that has a peculiar way of telling its story. Because Mathieu Kassovitz, based on the quote that we see before, gave us a 24-hour walk where we followed Vince, Hubert, and Said, the three street kids of Paris's banlieue, who goes just about anywhere, and yet nowhere at all. It is a story of the hatred and the destructive nature between the young Parisian and the oppressive authorities. To us, it's just another familiar struggle of a falling society, and yet, the way the story is told is anything but familiar. The difference in Alain becomes visible when we compare it to the more mainstream films. You may as well pick out some films that you could just sit back and enjoy to then see that there's one thing in common between those films. That's because they've all used the form and style of the classical Hollywood cinema, even though it's not a Hollywood film per se. It is a formula of storytelling that has a three-act, which means there's a distinctive beginning, middle, and ending, where we often find a character that is motivated to achieve a certain goal, and that their action will be the cause to whatever it is they find further down the plot that is there to serve as the effect or the payoff. Speaking of plots, there is also the noticeable plot points which we will see as the film progresses in one smooth, continuous flow of editing. But we won't find any of that in Alain. So, my question is this. If it doesn't use the classical Hollywood cinema's formula, both in its form and in its style, to tell its story, what did it use then? Well, it will be none other than the French New Wave cinema. The French New Wave, or the Nouvelle Vague, is a movement in cinema that is brought to life by people such as Claude Jean-Luc Godard, François Truffaut, and many other great French filmmakers during the 50s and 60s. They came up with the idea where they deliberately tried to break the concept of classical Hollywood cinema movement because they believe that the directors should have the complete control over their film. So, as written in Bordwell and Thompson's book, these directors make their film as an art form that expresses their personal vision of the world, rather than for one's entertainment. This is known as the auteur policy, which is also the same policy that Mathieu Kassovitz used to make his personal vision of the Paris's ghetto. Let's start from the story and the plot. In the words of David Bordwell and Kristin Thompson, the French New Wave movement emphasized the open-ended narrative. So how the story ends is up for the audience to conclude on their own, thus disregarding the more concrete three-act structure notion because of the no apparent conclusion in the end. Also, the French New Wave films' plot are often built around chance events and digressive episodes. I like to believe that the plot is loosely put together, with, sometimes, no clear connection from one scene to another. So, this won't be the cause and effect situation like the ones we see in classical Hollywood cinema. It is also quite hard to determine the dynamics of the plot in most French New Wave films, since there's little to no plot points at all. I mean, we know how the story starts, and we know when the film stops, although we may not know how the story ends. But the other three equally important plot points, such as the rising action, the climax, and the falling action, seems to got lost, or maybe they were never there at all in the first place. It's like those three things has been thrown out of the window, and we're just left with the characters going about their day while we follow them around throughout the film. Well now, Alain is exactly all of those things I've said before. Now, let's see. The open-ended narrative. Story of Land is about three friends walking, talking, and hanging out around the banlieue for a whole day right after the Paris riot. And sometimes they manage to get themselves into troubles that are either starts because of them or just simply comes to them. Until we finally see Vince get shot in the head, and then there's a standoff between Hubert and a police officer, with Said as the witness of this accident before it all cuts to black. Based on a statement given by Bordwell and Thompson, the plot of Line is what I would also refer to as a string of chance event and digressive episodes. The plot is just filled with them going somewhere into something or someone, either intentional or accidental, that doesn't have any correlation whatsoever from one thing to the next. From talking about a reality TV show to getting locked up or making a scene at a hospital. After that, let's listen to a random old man's story and have a game of Russian roulette with a coked up maniac until finally getting locked up again. If that's not enough, why don't we pathetically seduce some girl before thrashing an art exhibition and then steal a car to go home because we missed the last train? I mean, why not? Who cares? But do you want to know why Mathieu Kassovitz wrote the plot like this? Based on his quote that you see at the start of this video, all he wanted is to get these three kids through 24 hours for us to get to know them. Kassovitz just wanted to show us the difficult life that these kids had to endure in complete detail. And the best way for him to do it is to bring us this somewhat random events, just like what you would see in a French New Wave film. The plot points of Line are also similar to the ones in the French New Wave. We just know how the story starts, and then we know when the film stops. The rising action, the climax, and falling action is still vague. And one thing for sure, we still doesn't know how the story ends. Now the last point that I want to talk about is the editing. There's two scenes in Lion that uses the same editing technique from French New Wave era that's known as the jump cuts, popularized by Jean-Luc Godard's 1960 film A Bout de Souffle, or Breathless. An editing technique where there's an abrupt transition which breaks the continuity in the shot. These jump cuts happen when Hubert is in his bed rolling a marijuana, and then again in the dance battle scene. We may argue that these jump cuts is used only as a time lapse or an economical way to fast forward in time, but it is still worth to be mentioned because it is the same technique from the French New Wave era, and it still fits with the frenetic and sudden nature of the story that we are witnessing. Now to sum it all up. In conclusion, Line is not a French New Wave film. I mean, the movement came around during the 50s and 60s, whereas Lion was made in 1995, so don't bother trying to fit Lion in that category. But it does have the characteristic of the French New Wave cinema, both in its form and in its style. And well, if you ask me, I don't think there's any other way for a Lion to tell its story than as it is now. Because what better way to show the poor life of these kids and the frustration that they have to endure day by day, other than by breaking the norm of how film should be conventionally made? The influence of the French New Wave cinema is certainly strong in this film, and that is why I named this essay Reviving the Old New Wave. This is the battle of the forgotten equality. This is the music, the bullet, the anger, and the hatred of all these young Parisians. This is Live.